The Canberra Chess Club Club Championship of 2023, Round 2. Questioning reality. I'm going to do things slightly differently this time. Rather than explaining all my thoughts and showing all the variations I considered in the game, I'm simply going to explain the moves that actually were played and only look at certain highlights from the unplayed variations after the whole game has been shown. Further, I'm not going to use computer engines to evaluate the positions. Not until the very end, anyway. Analysing this game in this way has been interesting to me because, at first glance, this game tells the story of a draw. But as we will find out, things were not what they seemed to be. So come along and let me show you how that deceptive first glance appeared to me. Playing with the white pieces, I opened with e4, and after e5 and knight f3, my opponent played d6, a passive move which gives white easy play. For instance, d4 striking in the center, which is what I played, and after e takes d4, knight takes d4, knight f6, knight c3, defending the pawn, and bishop e7 looking to castle, I played bishop c4, which is logical, developing the bishop to an active square and preparing to castle myself. I have a well-coordinated position with plenty of space and an easy development scheme. Meanwhile, black is passive and posing no real threats. The problem from the white side is not that I'm under pressure from black, but that I need to come up with some creative way of putting black under pressure. Even though I have an edge, the question is how to transform that edge into a tangible advantage and then use that to win. It won't be easy, it won't be quick, but if I keep making good moves, I might have chances for a win some way down the line. The game continued, knight c6, castles, bishop d7, bishop e3, castles, all of which again are natural moves, developing pieces to active squares. But we had now reached a stage where my knights and bishops were both nicely developed, my king was castled, and I still needed to find a move. I looked around and thought about my queen. I liked the way it peered along the d1, h5 diagonal. I thought of playing it to e2, where it would defend my light-squared bishop and connect my rooks, and remain upon this nice diagonal. Somehow though, that move seemed slightly goofy and backhanded, so I looked elsewhere. I thought about f3, solidifying my e4 pawn, and gaining further control of the f4 square, so that his knight couldn't land there anymore, because from g4 the knight would attack my dark-squared bishop in an annoying way. But then again, the downside of f3 is that it opens up the dark squared diagonal leading toward my king and therefore weakens my kingside position in some way. Also, I might want to play f4 instead. f4, I thought, would be nice because it would restrict his c6 knight from reaching e5. Again though, it would weaken the position of my king by opening the dark squared diagonal aforementioned. Also, in future it might make more sense to play f4 only after his knight lands on e5, so that the move comes with tempo. I thought about moving my king off that diagonal by playing king h1, and this would be flexible and allow me to take more time in deciding between f3 and f4 in the future, whilst taking the present moment to move my king off the diagonal that would ultimately be weakened. But then again, it also seemed like I would be taking a passive stance, and I didn't want to do that. I wanted to strike out at him and make more progress in some way. I looked at my a-pawn. I thought of playing to a4. This would grab space and make a hidey hole for my bishop on a2, so I could get out of dodge in case he ever played knight a5. But then again, if he plays knight a5, I hide on a2, then suddenly my c3 knight is having to defend two pawns, the e4 pawn and the a4 pawn, which would be fine for now, but I would rather not place too much burden on any of my pieces. And I can still make my little hidey hole on a2 if I just play the slightly more modest a3. a3, that seems alright. It throws the ball back in his court. Alright, a3. That's what I played, and how I came up with the move. After a6, it's obvious that he wants to play b5 and hit my bishop, but that's okay, my bishop has a lot of squares to retreat to. I played b4 to grab some space of my own, and once again I put the ball back into his court. And he hit back with the knight e5 move I'd previously imagined as a reasonable move. This move centralizes his knight, and does so with a tempo against my light-squared bishop. And I retreated, not to the hidey hole on a2, however, but to b3, but to e2, the square I had refrained from putting my queen on earlier, specifically because I thought it would be goofy and backhanded. But having left that e2 square available, my bishop can now use that square to combine with my queen, and together they sweep through that diagonal with a lot of influence. Now he played b5, a strange move since it doesn't come with tempo, but still logical because it does still gain space, and it throws the ball back to me. At this stage, I have nice control of the d1-h5 diagonal. I still have a space advantage, my position's safe, and I'm ready to strike. Given his knights on e5, I choose to play f4, gaining more space for my f1 rook and controlling more of the center, whilst at the same time attacking his knight. Now, it's true he can play knight from e to g4, which he did, attacking my dark squared bishop, but my thought was that once I retreat the bishop to c1, I'll just about be ready to play h3, and that knight will only have one safe square. I'm wondering if I might end up trapping this knight somehow. Regardless, after bishop c1, he continued with c5, and this would be a good place to take stock. His d pawn is weak because it's backward, meaning it has no counterparty pawns to protect it. His g4 knight looks active, but it's actually quite fragile, and it's under pressure from my queen and bishop battery. My bishops control much more territory than his do. My central pawn presence is greater than his. Nevertheless, as has been the case all throughout this game so far, despite being in no danger myself, and despite having a nice position, I just can't find a way to breach his defenses. Now, with c5, he is attacking my knight, and given my observations about his potentially fragile knight on g4, which is under pressure from my queen and bishop, I decided to play out to f5 with my knight. The point is that my knight here interferes with his bishop's ability to defend the g4 knight. So I am threatening to win the g4 knight, and if he takes my knight, which he did, and I take back, I've now managed to simultaneously open a central portion of the board, that is the e file, whilst also bagging for myself the bishop pair, which typically convey an advantage in open positions. Meanwhile, after the trade of his bishop for my knight, his g4 knight remains under attack. You can appreciate that I feel like I'm on the front foot here. Not winning, no, but I am stalking him, throwing some jabs, and he's walking backward, trying not to let me corner him and unleash. Not wanting to withdraw his knight back to the awkward h3 square, he instead defended his knight with h5. But now he's opening up and therefore weakening his kingside. And so to me, this represented another concession and yet another slight advantage for me. I recognized the time to pounce could be upon me here. I played knight d5, installing my knight on a beautiful central square in front of his weak d6 pawn. He played c4, and I continued with bishop b2, adding more pressure to his f6 knight, whilst maintaining pressure against his g4 knight and the h5 pawn behind it, and figuring that something will buckle and break before too long if I just keep on pressing where he's sore. To my surprise, he took my knight. I didn't think he could do this because I have my knight defended with my queen, but then I saw that if I take his knight with my queen, then his other knight, fragile though it may have been, lands on e3 and forks my queen and rook, which would be bad for me. Therefore, I took his other knight, and since I have my queen and bishop battery attacking it, only after he recaptured my bishop did I swoop in and scoop his d5 knight, also at once installing my queen on that d5 square in front of his d6 weakness. He played queen b6 check, and I responded by bringing my bishop further into the center with a tempo against his queen. And when the queen retreated, I bolstered my bishop with c3, also fixing his c4 pawn in place. He offered to trade bishops, but I said I'd be only willing to do so if I could recapture with my rook, which would create a rook and queen battery against his d6 weakness. He did not oblige me that. However, he played queen c7 and I thought, he's lost the plot. Now I can take his bishop, double up his pawns, and crash through, winning his d6 pawn, taking full ownership of the d-file with my rooks, which is exactly what I did. Again, you can appreciate that I believe I'm doing really well. I think that this is sliding further in my favor, and whilst still a while away, I might be on the road to victory. He played king g7, activating his king for the endgame, and I doubled my rooks on the d-file as planned. He played a5, hoping to effect some trades on the a-file, resulting in an open a-file that he can use for his own rooks. And I can't stop that file from opening, but I can slow it down by making him be the first to capture. So I instead played my rook from d1 to d5, putting pressure on his b5 pawn. He traded pawns, I traded back, and he played his rook to a3, attacking my c3 pawn. I then took his pawn, he took mine, and I stepped back on top of his pawn so that he could never move his rook away from the c-file, lest he give up defense of the c4 pawn. And once again, I'm feeling good. I'm putting him under fire, he's ducking and weaving, he's moving left, he's moving right, he's not yet in a corner, but seems as though things are getting tight. He brought his other rook across to challenge my pawn, but I pushed it up into the custody of my own rooks. Then, when he doubled rooks to reassert his claim to my pawn, I also doubled my rooks, claiming that if he takes my pawn, I will trade a set of rooks and then take his pawn too. But once again, to my surprise, he did not take the pawn at all. He moved his top rook back across to the d-file. I saw his plan. I simply took his pawn in response, confident that my doubled rooks would be able to parlay any of his attack. He took my b5 pawn, which also attacks my f5 pawn, so I defended that whilst also offering a rook trade again, which he again declined. Instead played rook b2, cutting off my king so I'm restricted to the back rank. His threat, if I do nothing, is to play the other rook to d1, which would be checkmate. So needing to re-establish control of the second rank, I used my doubled rooks, as planned, to pester his b2 rook once again. And here again, he did not take a trade. Instead, he played his other rook to d1, checked my king, and when I stepped forward, as I was obliged to do by law, he played rook d2 check, thus also bringing a second attacker against my c2 rook, which is only defended once. This thereby forced me to trade one set of rooks, but that was what I wanted to do all along. I saw this coming, and I saw that after the trade of rooks, which ended in a check against my king, I would step forward with my king and be but a whiff away from winning his g4 pawn. If all of this has seemed like quite a close struggle in which I have the slight upper hand, if only by a hair, then that is how it seemed to me to be whilst playing this. That's why after king h6, rook c6, attacking his pawn and forcing the king back, then rook c3, preventing his rook from checking me along the third rank, king h6 again, trying to make progress, rook c6 again, drawing him back and repeating the position just to gain some time on my clock. He plays king g7, once again defending the pawn. I played rook c1, trying something different, and when he offered me a draw in this position, I respectfully declined. I have an extra pawn. I'm putting pressure on g4. I might be able to win it and be 2 pawns ahead. Regardless, even with a single extra pawn, I want to play and see if I can make a queen. No draw. I played h3. And after he took, I took back with my king. He then attacked my f5 pawn and I defended it with g4, using my extra pawn. After his check on d3, I just stepped forward. No more checks, not for now. He pushed his rook down to d2, threatening to then swing across and check me once again, but I won't give him that chance. I'll check him first with g5 check. He takes me, I take back again with check, forcing his king to move. He picks g7 as his square. And now I played rook c4 to prevent him from checking me along the 4th rank and to make sure my rook remains active. Yes, he can check me on h2, which he did, but now I move to g3, attacking his rook and forcing it back, and I follow up with rook h4, offering a trade, but he checks me again. I step along the board, 1 step and 1 check at a time, defending my remaining pawns as I go, until I reach e5, and then when he checks me, I block with the rook on the 4th rank, yet again offering the trade of rooks. Of course, here he declines, and again goes after my pawns. I realized here that I had gone the wrong way with my king. I also realized that if I stepped back across the other side, and he still refuses the rook trade and attacks my f6 pawn, I'll be able to push that pawn forward with check and keep making progress toward potentially creating a new queen. So back I went, king f4, then g4, then h5, and after check, I played the rook to h4, and as mentioned when he attacked my pawn, I pushed it forward with check. He stepped to king h7. Here, I thought I must be on the brink of victory. This will show him why I said no thank you to a draw. I played g6 check, and he captured back with a check. My response? I moved my king to g5 with check, a check he did not foresee. A discovered check from my rook, and with my pawn on f6 covering the g7 square, he is now forced by law back to g8, and the g6 pawn is now mine. I have a clean pawn extra. It's close to the promotion square. But now, he has a never-ending sequence of checks against my king. And I can try to run away from them, but I cannot run far because his king will then be able to approach my pawn from f7 and then combine with his rook to capture my remaining pawn, and that would be a draw. And so I try my luck with the only thing I have left. I once again offer a trade of rooks. This time, he takes me up on the deal. He then plays king f7 and I play king f5 defending my pawn. He plays to f8, and if I want any chance to win, I need to bring my king to a more active square. So I go to e6. He follows me across to e8. Now there's no sense in going backward, that would just repeat positions. So I push my pawn with check. He plays to f8, and unless I move away, abandoning my pawn to him, which also is a draw, my only other move here is to stay by its side with king f6, which ends the game, no less. And it is still a draw. A stalemate. The king is caught, nowhere to go, and yet it's not checked. As you can tell, this game struck me as one in which, despite my edge, I simply never had the chance to push him over that edge. I came so close to getting a new queen, and yet he somehow managed to hang on. But wait a minute now. Is everything the way it first appears to be? Is my perception of reality truly accurate? Or was there something deeper going on that I missed? How could I have not won this game? I spent the next few days reflecting on this game, revisiting some of the key moments it held, and wondering if there was anything I could have done better. I deliberately did not use the computer to assist my analysis. I relied entirely on my own thoughts about the positions, and I'll share some of those with you now. So let's go back to the start and click through until we reach the first position of real interest for me. It's move 13, where he played pawn to c5, attacking my knight. As you now know, I ended up playing knight f5 with the idea of interfering with his bishop's defense of the g4 knight, and with the concurrent idea of trading my knight for his bishop, thereby bagging the bishop pair for myself. But as you also now know, the doubled pawn's structure turned out to be a big impediment for me in the end game. So this seems like a natural point to re-examine. In the game, I had also considered the move knight c6, with the idea that I'm attacking his queen and bishop, and if he takes the knight, then I can take his g4 knight immediately. But since this allows him to take my bishop and gives him the bishop pair, I decided not for this. In hindsight, I believe I should have played the knight back to b3 in this position. I'm still prepared to follow up with h3, kicking his knight, and in the case of b4, I can just jump back to where I was, except that now I'm unassailable in that position. No more pawns can pester me there. In this position, I believe it's hard for him to come up with a move, whereas for me, I have h3 coming. I can bring my dark squared bishop back into play, connect my rooks, bring them to the center. I should be better here. Alas, the next moment, after knight f5 and bishop takes knight, pawn takes bishop, h5, I believe here I should have played h3 immediately. Then when the knight moves, I can capture his h5 pawn. Now it's true, he can capture my f5 pawn in reply, but then I return my bishop to f3. It's on a long diagonal attacking his rook, and once it moves, I can play knight d5, and once again, I'm comfortable, and he is not. This might have been a better way to go, but nonetheless. I played instead the move knight d5. I feel quite good about that move. He followed up with c4 and I played bishop d2. Remember here, he took my knight and I was unable to recapture due to the fork of the other knight against my queen and rook, and that's why I played bishop takes knight instead. Well, to my shock and horror, on analysing this a little bit deeper, I noticed that even after bishop takes knight, he can continue with knight e3, and he still forks my queen and rook, as well as my bishop. This means, hang on, I blundered with the move bishop b2. This game was not me pushing him towards the ropes and searching for a knockout blow. This was me throwing wild punches and leaving my guard completely down, and giving him the chance to knock me flat out in one punch. I missed this completely. I got lucky that he meekly took my bishop and allowed me to recapture his dangerous knight on d5. But from here on, I should be okay, right? Well, actually, come to think on it, after he played queen b6 check, I think I would have been better to move my king to h1. Why? Well, as played with bishop at d4, it's true his queen gets pushed back home, but now my bishop blocks my queen from reaching d1, which is a great square for my queen because from d1, my queen would attack his weak g4 pawn, and that g4 pawn ended up actually causing me a lot of hassle in the end. If I had played king h1 after the queen b6 check move, then on the next move I could have followed up with queen d1, and I could have taken on g4 shortly thereafter, and for sure, I should be better here. But other than that, the rook endgame seems to be fairly forced. We each trade blows, taking a pawn here, taking a pawn there. This one for that one for this one. All of his checks are parried by my doubled rooks, and I don't think I misplayed this part. I succeeded in getting my king to g3, putting pressure on his g4 pawn. My last remaining question on my own analysis is, after rook d5, I wonder, what would have happened if I defended my f5 pawn with my king? Because in the end, my issue was that the king was behind my pawn and therefore unable to help it reach its promotion square. So what if here I had started with the king in front of the pawn? Would this have led me to victory? Well, no, it doesn't seem that way, because after king g4, let's say rook d2, attacking the pawn, and I just push it up to g3, there's actually no way for either of us to make progress. We just move our rooks endlessly with no real purpose in sight. And so, in summary, after my own reflections on this game for a matter of days, it seems that what I thought was real, that is, a close struggle in which I had the upper hand, was actually a wild fight in which I made a big blunder. But otherwise, I let victory slip away by not being patient enough. I should have played more patiently and allowed him to wallow in the discomfort of his position by playing moves like knight to b3 or king to h1. Alas, again, it wasn't to be. But before we end this discussion on my round 2 game, I just want to describe a third version of events. And this is the one that comes about when analysing the game through the lens of artificial intelligence. So let's go back to the start one last time and question what we believe we know about this game so far. Let's click forward again through to that move 13, c5, where my knight was attacked. According to AI, I shouldn't play knight b3, as I thought in my analysis. For if I do, black actually does have a good move. It's queen b6, which threatens to push his c-pawn with check, winning the knight. For example, even if I take his knight, he plays c takes b4 with check. Now I can block with my queen. He takes, again with check. I take back. And now he takes my other knight. And after the bishop trade, he comes out of this, on the whole, with an extra pawn, with extra space. He's without a doubt better, and conversely, I am worse. That said, knight b3 is still better than what I actually played. My move, knight f5, was not just a way to nullify any advantage I may have had, although, as we've now seen, I actually didn't have an advantage here at all, I was playing worse, but knight f5 just made things worse again. I just got lucky that after the trade of his bishop for my knight, he played h5, a mistake. If he had instead played queen b6 at that time, with the same old idea of uncovering a check against my weakened king, that would have created big problems for me. If I move my king out the way, he still takes on b4 with tempo on my knight, such that even if I take his knight, he takes mine, and again on sum, he's the one that's up a pawn, he's the one with extra space, he's the one with the advantage, and reality is not what it seemed to be. I was not much better in this game at all. I wasn't slightly better pushing for a win. I was not only worse, but much worse. And then my move, knight d5. I thought this was as safe as anything. My knight's defended by my queen. But it turns out that if he takes the knight and I take back, he can move his bishop to attack my rook. And if I move my rook to safety, which is natural enough, he has bishop d4 check, forcing my king, I repeat, forcing my king to h1. Whereupon there is the nasty move knight takes h2, winning another pawn, winning another tempo against my rook, and if I take the knight, it's immediate checkmate with queen h4. So much for me stalking him and him trying not to be backed into a corner. See, I assumed my knight was safely defended by my queen. But what I failed to do was to calculate what would happen if he took my knight, and I had to retake with my queen. I was blinded by preconceptions about the position, rather than enlightened by concrete insight into reality. What I perceived was my own judgment, that is, that I am stronger than he is. But reality disagrees. To add insult to injury, after he actually played queen to b6, and I was saying after my several days of analysing that I should have played king h1, preparing queen d1 and ultimately queen takes g4, it turns out that actually no, bishop d4 is by far the best move. And the reason is that after king h1, there's the sneaky move c3. And if I take, he attacks my bishop, and even though I can move away with tempo against the queen, he can then offer a queen trade that cannot be refused on account of the pressure he has against my c2 pawn. And subsequently, once again, he is the one to double on the c-file with pressure against me. Objectively, it's equal here, but I'm the one under pressure. 3 final points before we wrap this up. Point 1. After we traded dark squared bishops, my position was actually very strong. Strong enough to win, but I had to play h3, refraining from taking the d6 pawn. If he takes me, then rook f3 is played, and you can see my rooks and queen are about to infiltrate that little neck of the woods where his king lives. Nevertheless, I was correct that taking on d6 still left me in a strong position. But to make the most of it, I needed to immediately activate my king instead of immediately doubling my rooks. Nevertheless, I went into the rook endgame that I thought I played quite well, and that brings me to point 2, which is that the computer vehemently disagrees. Specifically, after we traded the second set of pawns and I stepped my rook back to c5, in my mind, basically forcing his rook to stay on the c-file forevermore, he could have played rook c2 immediately. And note that because my rooks are not doubled in this scenario, I cannot play rook d2 to re-establish control of the second rank. My best bet here is rook d4, attacking his pawn and trying to double rooks again. But he plays rook a8, threatening to checkmate me on a1, leading to mate. I block. He comes to e8, again threatening mate. I bring the king to f1, blocking the mating square. But still, he gets to double his rooks on the second rank. And now what can I do? Nothing. I push my pawn. He checks me. He wins my pawns, and ultimately pushes his pawn towards promotion. He's crushing me. I didn't play this rook endgame well. I let him have his chance. Not only that, but let's go on, because the next move, after he attacked my pawn and I pushed it to b5, he again had the same chance to play rook c2, with the same ideas just shown. One last time, after I took on c4, he could have played rook d1 check, then rook d2 check, forcing me back to the first rank again, and allowing himself yet again to double his rooks on the second rank. And I missed all of this. Reality. It simply passed me by. And the third and final point is that after the first set of rooks got traded, and he offered me a draw, which I declined because I thought that I could win, it turns out that there was no way to win in this game. It was already stale. It doesn't matter if I end up leading with my king or with my pawn. No matter what, there is no win. I wasn't wrong to try, but I was wrong in thinking there was something there. At least from here, I didn't give him any chance to win. I held it as a draw, and even ended with an extra pawn, making it seem like I was truly the stronger side of the stalemate. But that is just the point. There is no stronger side in a stalemate. It's just an even draw. And the truth is, I was lucky that I came out of this with a half point, because on several occasions, I could have been knocked out. So there you go. 3 takes on this game. 1 from how it looked when I played it, 1 from my postpartum analysis, and 1 from the perspective of AI. And what it shows is that reality is there. The answers to our questions are in front of us. But our perception of reality is not always accurate, even though it can be very convincing. Our perception is shaped by the assumptions we make. And if we had the minds to firstly be aware of those assumptions, and then to question them and follow the subsequent chain of reasoning several links into the distance, then our assumptions may be shattered, and with them our illusions, and we may then see reality for what it really is. Until then, let's just assume that what we think is true may actually be false, and what we think is safe may be in grave danger, and what we think is doomed may really be destined for greatness. So, don't rejoice or rest on your laurels, and don't despair or lose hope, because you do not know the truth of it. That's it for now. I'll see you in round 3 of the Canberra Chess Club Championship next week. In next week's game, I'll be especially attentive to the practice of questioning my assumptions about the positions that I'm in. Till then, take care of yourselves and others, and we'll see you then.